everywhere we turn, there's deception. And to help you better identify this deception, David Langford and the Voice of Evangelism has assembled a stellar lineup of speakers for their Age of Deception conference coming to the Hickory Metro Convention Center April 4th through 7th. Join David Langford along with world-renowned researcher and author Steve Quayle, Douglas and Joe Hagman of the Hagman and Hagman Report, artificial intelligence expert Hugo DeGaris, Irving Baxter, host of the internationally syndicated biblical prophecy television program End of the Age, along with Jimmy D. Smith and Russ Dizdar for the Age of Deception Conference, April 4th through 7th at the Hickory Metro Convention Center. You can make your reservations now online at thevoiceofelvangelism.com. Registration fee is $100 per person. Find out more about the speakers and their speaking schedules at thevoiceofelvangelism.com and make your reservation now to attend the Age of Deception Conference coming to Hickory, North Carolina at the Hickory Metro Convention Center April 4th through 7th.
I believe it's going to be for everyone because, one of the things that's happening, there's no breaks in the event as they're unfolding. When you're learning to run, especially race cars and, formula cars and the fast cars, obviously I'm going to use a kind of a cool metaphor. The key is constant RPM and shifting at the same RPM so you don't lose, basically, any engine speed, constant engine speed. Well, what we're doing right now is we are absolutely beyond revved up. We are at the shift points for events transpiring, happening, taking place, one right after the other. And if you think of it, even the Apostle Paul talked about running the race. Well, obviously they didn't have cars in those days, but they had chariots. So the idea is that for everyone to be able to finish the race, they have to understand the race, what's at stake, and how to go about preparing to win the race. So it's not those who start the race and pull back or fail. It's those who finish the race. And so what Tom Horn has done in the Rabbis, Donald Trump, and the Third Temple, Secret Plan to Build the Third Temple, is a book that's really timely and really important because there's a lot of Christians clapping for things like the red heifer and the return of the Third Temple and all this stuff and cooperating in the plan of the Antichrist. So I think that Tom has hit once again the home run, as you put up on your website today, Doug, for the events transpiring. So now what's going to happen is that people are going to see almost all these formerly prophetic future events, disparate historic events, and just unusual people getting together, people double-crossing each other, triple-crossing each other. But there's a central figure that's coming on the scene beyond the Pope. And if anyone ever doubted that this Pope or anti-Pope is a false prophet, I don't think they have to go further than the split that he's brought about in the historic Roman Catholic Church. And as Tom Horn was the only guy with Chris Putnam before Chris passed away to nail, the month that the previous Pope would step down, which had never happened. So I want people to pay specific attention to this. And is Tom on with us now?
I'm here.
There he is.
So, Tom, I'm just giving you introduction. So go ahead and give the introduction. When you wear out, want to give it back to me because I'll deal with the Jared Kushner issue that I shared with you. But you go ahead and because this is tonight, I think a seminal, watershed, prophetic, bell-ringing moment. So go ahead, sir.
Well, by the way, great to be on with you guys again. It's always just so much fun. It doesn't get any better than Steve Quayle and Doug Hagman and Joe Hagman.
Oh, I'll tell you what, thanks. That's nice of you to say. And it's great to have you on. And I just have to say, kind of out of the gate, I think you hit a home run with this one. But go ahead. I'm not gonna waste any of your time. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, really, how timely is this discussion? You guys know because you watch the headlines every day that in just the last 48 hours, the Palestinians and the Jordanians came together, actually confirmed part of the scheme that was that's in my new book, but that also I published on Skywatch TV in part one of an online series based on the new book 2 weeks ago, and it confirmed to me that even the Jordanians, the Palestinians, these people watch us and they listen to what we're saying because they know we're connected, and our connections go inside Washington D.C., even among members of the current Trump administration. But now the Palestinians and the Jordanians, this week, they set up this joint council for what? The administration of the Temple Mount and the other Muslim holy sites in Jerusalem. Why? In an effort to preemptively torpedo the advancement of U.S. President Donald Trump's regional peace plan. And in fact, one of the senior Fatah officials said specifically the move was because the Jordanians and the Palestinians are aware that within the framework of the regional peace plan, responsibility for the Temple Mount will be transferred to a joint Arab-Islamic Council granting Saudi Arabia official status around the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, I go into a lot of this already in the new book, why that's happening, and some of the potential pitfalls around all of it. But the bottom line is, they're trying, and it may work. Their scheme might work by adding 5 members of the Palestinians to the Jordanian control over the Temple Mount. It might cause some last-minute edits to the peace plan that would remove some of the language that was going to be part of the barter, which would have pushed Saudi Arabia. There's some other things that are also happening we can talk about later with Saudi Arabia and the murder of Khashoggi and stuff like that have caused some modifications in the current plan. But I had access to some of the information that was being fed to me, and that was what caused me to rush to publish this book, The Top Secret Plan to Build the Third Temple, because there definitely was language in there. And by working, well, I'll get into that after a while. Anyway, bottom line is, Jared Kushner now, Jason Greenblatt, they're going to be arriving in the Middle East here in the next couple of weeks, if the plan stays as it is today, to begin advancing this, the whatever Trump called it, the peace plan of all peace plans or whatever. Now, Steve said something a moment ago. He said, that even the Christians are out there pushing for the construction of a third temple and all that, not knowing that they're actually playing into the hands of a malaise here, of a scheme that ultimately is going to generate the arrival of Antichrist before it generates the arrival of the second coming of Jesus Christ. At least that's what I believe, and many people in evangelical Christianity believe. So a second article published just yesterday, actually written by liberals, and they were bemoaning this fact, but the headline is called, "A Christian Group is Building a Movement That Could Destabilize Jerusalem's Most Explosive Holy Site." So if people want to go out and find that article and read it, they're talking about this organization that started a few years ago called Cry for Zion, which is an Israel-based organization, but it's recruiting Christians worldwide in a campaign ultimately to see complete Israeli control where the Al-Aqsa Mosque now stands on the Temple Mount. And so these are Christian Zionists, and the article goes all into how they were instrumental in Donald Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and to locate the American embassy there. But a move that, without doubt, many of the Orthodox rabbis see as being imbued with spiritual, even prophetic meaning. That movement is a major step forward to what they consider to be the Messianic era that will see the arrival of their Messiah. So, in fact, there was you can Google this and read about it too. There was a Cry for Zion conference just in December. And in fact, it was held at the same Jerusalem Convention Center where you might remember a few years ago, Rabbi Yehuda Glick, remember when there was an attempt on his life and he got shot like 5 times? And he got shot because not only is he a member of the Knesset, the Israeli government, but he's an advocate for the building of the third temple. And so, anyway, they held it at the same place, and this Mordecai Perzov, who's a rabbi, the head of the Mikdash Educational Center, and if that sounds familiar to you, it's because that's the same people who minted the Trump coins, the 2 different Trump Cyrus coins, depicting Donald Trump as a Cyrus figure, but on the back depicting the coming of the third temple. And they're selling those coins to raise money towards ultimately the construction of the third temple. Anyway, Mordecai, the head of the Mikdash Ed Center, was speaking there, and I'll just quote this brief quote. he said, when maybe the biggest leader, talking about Donald Trump, of the world now says that Jerusalem is the center of the world, it has to be a kind of prophecy. This is our Temple Mount. It belongs to us, and we are not going to go up as visitors. We're going to push and remind people that we are there to build the real house in Jerusalem, and now it's possible. So there is a movement towards all of this, and it's gaining steam, and so maybe not unsurprising. It's also gaining steam among many Christians who are also advocates for the construction of a third temple. And behind the scenes, one of the things people will learn when they read this book is that there are those who are among the faith council for Donald Trump, and especially among the Jewish camp, that do really believe that God Almighty put Donald Trump in office as a Cyrus-like figure, ultimately for the purposes of regaining control over the Temple Mount and the construction of a third temple. And that is the reason why some of them are being so vocal about it, including members of the Sanhedrin. That is also why Netanyahu sent a message that didn't go unnoticed by myself and a lot of other people when he stood up the day after Donald Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and ordered our embassy to be moved there. And Netanyahu got up and said Donald Trump was not only making history, but he said it's imbued with prophecy. And then he made this famous statement: "The Temple Mount is in our hands." Well, that was clearly a signal, because that was exactly what was said following the 67 war, in which they retook Jerusalem, and all of the conservative and Orthodox Jews were running around saying, the Temple Mount is in our hands, the Temple Mount is in our hands. So there's a lot of signaling that's going on here to the people that are in the know and that understand what this movement is toward.
If I can ask you a question, Tom, isn't the Temple Mount real estate, if you will, biblically and legally theirs, the belong to Israel and the Jews?
Well, it is, in the sense that they claimed control over it, but at the time they made a deal following the war to give the Muslims, the Jordanians, the Muslims, the Waqf, control over the Temple Mount and some of the other holy sites. But the Temple Mount is the firebrand, the cup of trembling. Right. And a lot of Jews today, even secular Jews, believe that was a mistake, because it's put so many limitations, like Jews can't go up there and pray and things like that. And that's part of the movement today. Even the ones that are not necessarily looking for the construction of a third temple, they do believe that Jews ought to have access to be able to pray there, and that it's a site that is holy to all three of the Abrahamic faiths.
So there are two separate movements then. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to overtalk you. There are two separate movements, if you will. One to reclaim the ground, or one that has reclaimed the ground. And the second, distinctly different, but closely related, would be the Third Temple. I just want to make that distinction. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. And both Jews and many Christians believe that the construction of a third temple is necessary. Now, from a Christian point of view, and Steve could probably even do a better job than I can delineating all of this. And for the people that are listening to this program that wonder, so what's the big deal about a third temple? Who cares, right, about a third temple? It's because out of especially dispensational Christianity, but even just Western evangelical Christianity, we interpret prophecy, like in Daniel 9:27. It refers to the temple when it says that the prince who is to come, that is the Antichrist, will enter it, and he'll stop the sacrifices in the middle of the tribulation. And so it was Jesus in Matthew 24 who describes this abomination of desolation. In fact, he says, when you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place. So the Apostle Paul mentions it when he declares that the man of lawlessness is going to profane the temple by entering it and declaring himself to be God. He said that to the Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians. So people believe that the third temple Well, some, by the way, also believe it's mentioned in the book of Revelation when John is told to measure it. But they believe that a third temple has to be built because Daniel the prophet, the Apostle Paul, Jesus Christ refer to this man of sin desecrating the temple, setting up probably an image of himself and declaring himself to be God, Paul says. So that has to be built, but it first is going to be desolated. It's going to be profaned by the Antichrist before a sanctioned temple. So I talked to a rabbi not long ago, a Messianic rabbi, and he said there will be a third temple, but it's an unsanctioned temple. It's not the one that God wants, and therefore it's going to be profaned by Antichrist. There's going to be Armageddon, second coming of Jesus Christ. Now, in his belief, the real temple is going to descend down from heaven, and a lot of Orthodox Jews believe that too. And it's going to be the one that's going to settle over the Temple Mount in Israel following some catastrophic war that probably wipes out everything that's there. And then it's from there that Jesus Christ will reign for 1,000 years over the earth, seated in Jerusalem. So there's different ideas. It'll either be built by people or it's going to come down from God out of heaven, and both Jews and Christians kind of go back and forth over those ideas. But again, it is the cup of trembling. Jerusalem is the center of prophecy. And Tom Horn comes from the point of view that a third temple is going to be built and that it's going to give rise to the Antichrist.
I think that's the critical issue, Doug and Joe, and good evening, everyone. Because here is I would call it, Tom. There's two thoughts on this. First of all, Jesus said this statement. He said, "I came, and you received me not. Another will come, claiming to be the Messiah, and he you will receive." And so, this has been something that's really been, I'll use a bakery's term, I don't know how to bake a cake, but frosting my cake. I don't believe that Christians understand the scenes going, the plans for their destruction going on behind the scenes. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, when everybody says, "Oh, isn't it great what the Sanhedrin are doing?" No, they're the ones that, in concert with the Pharisees, crucified Jesus. So, to a religious Orthodox Jew, Jesus is not the Messiah. He's not the Son of God. So they're going to take the Antichrist, and Antichrist, just again for basic Bible, means in place of Christ. And Tom, I shared something with Tom, and I'm going to share it with everybody right now. The other night, I don't know, maybe a week ago, this thing was really bothering me just because so many Christians seems to be quiet about our brethren slaughter worldwide, yet embracing their coming slaughter. God promised that he was going to dwell in us by the Holy Spirit. So our bodies are the temple of the Holy Ghost. So that's what I call an internalist. And so it's always the people that want external pomp and splendor and some form of what I would call religiosity that usually contribute to their own demise. I don't have the time to go into that, but I want to quote Isaiah 55:7-9. "Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts, and let him return unto the Lord, and he will have mercy upon him, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon." And here's the part that God really, I can't tell you how this resonated in my spirit, like cymbals, two of them on my head. "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." And instantly I felt the understanding that God gave. And listen, this is really critical, because what Tom is talking about, ladies and gentlemen, is the acceleration of Bible prophecy. It doesn't matter if you're looking at it from the Palestinians' viewpoint, the Muslims' viewpoint, the Jews' viewpoint, but it really matters from the Christian viewpoint, because all of Jerusalem and the entire, if you will, antiquities and everything in this 1948 forward Israel is basically controlled by international elitists. It's just like, where are all the books of Enoch? There were 360 volumes of them, and we only got partial to 3 of them. So all of the real antiquities, from the bones of the giants to other Dead Sea Scrolls validating the scriptures, actual findings, that absolutely testify to Jesus, they want that stuff covered up. And so what I was telling Tom the other night, I just heard this in my spirit. Now, look, here, everyone has to take this to the Lord in prayer. I felt the Lord said, Steve, it was during the days of Jared. Now, Jared in the Old Testament lived to be 962 years old, okay? And Jared was the father of Enoch, the biblical Enoch that walked with God and was not, and God took him. But what was interesting, here's what dropped into my spirit. I'd never thought of this in my life, so all I can say is that, something's going on here. That Jared was the patriarch, second oldest man in the Old Testament, when the fallen angels fell on Mount Hermon. And that's in the book of Enoch, chapter 6, and it's also in Jubilees referred to. Now, what's important is that Enoch was the seventh from Adam. And so what we're seeing here is some unusual things. We've got the seventh from Adam, and I believe Enoch is one of the two witnesses, and this has everything to do with what we're talking about, that Jared Kushner, the man of peace behind the scenes, is absolutely the prime candidate, I believe, for the AC, the Antichrist. Because, listen, here's why. The spirit, in my opinion, the Bible talks specifically about the spirit of Antichrist, the literal devil entering into him, just like you did Judas Iscariot. But what's even more important, Jared Kushner's address is 666 Fifth Avenue. And if you understand the history of the Tishman building, that's what it was called originally, and then the Bronfmans and the whole, if you will, menagerie of different players in trying to fund the 1.4, I think it is, $1 billion purchase price of that piece of real estate. If you take New York, and I do, as the commercial center of commercial Babylon, then what you've got is you've got someone whose name links with the time of the fallen angels, and it's my position, Tom, I know you know this, that the earthly kings, so many of them are fallen angels, if you will, in human drag. That's the only way I know how to say it. And the thing that is really critical is that it's imperative that people understand that there's a lot in a name, because the name Jared, and that's what's interesting, means descent or descendant. So the parallels, why did God speak Isaiah 55, 7 through 9? Because he was telling me, Steve, you're not going to be able to figure it out. And only my people who are staying close to me will have eyes to see and ears to hear. And aren't we commanded that in the scripture, Tom?
Yeah.
So just as God has opened your eyes to the whole, if you will, outplaying of the third temple, we have now the outplaying of the building of the third temple, in which Antichrist will come, and we've got Christians basically clapping and jumping up and down and paying money to bring about the ultimate destroyer of humanity. And I don't know how to say it any more easily. Yesterday on the Daily Mail, there was a story about Ivanka Trump addressing someone, and interestingly enough, she had a red Kabbalah-style thread bracelet. And if you don't understand, Kabbalah is basically, it's Jewish mysticism. Some people call it Jewish witchcraft. So, and that's listen to this, that's to protect the person wearing it from the evil eye. And the first person that did that openly and really made a big deal about it was Madonna. Now that's interesting that we've got the, if you will, within the present, we've got the president who's doing everything that he believes is right to do for Israel, the Cyrus coins, all of those events, but, has his physical descendant is married to what could turn out to be one of the most, what would you say, villainous men in the world. That is my opinion. And I think if people will pray about it, he comes on the scene. But look at, he's been behind the scenes, the fight over his security clearance. There's so much going on behind the scenes that I think it's really difficult, Doug and Joe, for people to get a grasp on this. But here it is in a nutshell. I'm going to turn right back to Tom. We've got the temple being built. We've got all the events lining up. We've got everything shifting in gears at Redline, and that means you're just shifting from one to another. You don't ever want to lose. So we're not losing momentum. We're building momentum. We're building momentum. And instead of the tachometer pegging, we're getting new, if you will, new energy bursts, not good, evil ones, and they're raising, they're revving up their engine. engine, so to speak, and they're going into a realm now where it's going to accelerate beyond most people's ability to keep up. And this is why I want to tell something, and I want to make it clear. Those of you who are, quote, getting involved in this, jumping up and down, sending money, listening to the standard evangelical, this is a fulfillment of prophecy. It's the Antichrist, the in place of the Lord Jesus Christ that's coming. And that in itself, Tom, will provide the basis, as you know, your book, Blood on the Altar, which, by the way, everybody who's listening to this broadcast, if there's ever a book that has been more timely, even though it was years ago that Tom first printed it, it's Blood on the Altar. You must get that. Go ahead, Tom. That just gives the Jared Kushner unusual, coordinated arrival on the scene at the same time. And by the way, he's hooked up with all the billionaires who are the ones that basically control the Middle East.
Well, that's what I was going to say. When people get my new book on the Third Temple, they'll read in there how Jared has been central to the fact, secret negotiations with Saudi Arabia and his friendship with the Crown Prince. So they will read all about that he's been playing this central role. Look, it hasn't been, you brought this up, me and Chris Putnam predicted the resignation of Pope Benedict XVI a year in advance. But it hasn't been since that time, when we wrote Petrus Romanus, that I had such a powerful gut feeling that things are unfolding right now. And I don't believe in New Age stuff, premonitions, none of that kind of stuff. But there is something here that sometimes, the Lord speaks once, yea, twice. The Holy Spirit will reveal things to you. Jesus said, there is something that is coming, and this time it's much bigger than the prophecy of the Pope. In fact, it's earth-shattering. I think it's going to accomplish nothing less than literally altering the course of history. And I'll make several points about that as we talk tonight. But at the end of the day, it's going to unfold and set in motion arrival of Antichrist and Armageddon, followed by the second coming of Jesus Christ. That's what I personally believe. That's why it's so much bigger than what Chris Putnam and I did, with all respect, on the prophecy of the popes. This book, by the way, took over a year of research, and I had to make several visits to Washington, D.C. to meet with some people there that are, I can't name their names. That doesn't even make any difference because it's not going to change the facts anyway. But it's not because Tom Horn is so smart and such a great investigator that he figured out some of this stuff. The reason that I was ahead of even the Jordanians in stating that behind the scenes there was a movement that was going to push through this peace plan to give control over the Temple Mount and other holy sites to Saudi Arabia is because I was told by an authority on the inside of the Trump administration that was part of the peace plan. Now, it might change now. They might, tweak some of the language or whatever, or maybe not. Maybe that will be part of the negotiation.
Initially, if I'm to understand this correctly, and I apologize, and by the way, Joe's not sick tonight, as we all have been really sick the last couple of days. But am I understand then what you just said with respect to the Saudi role in this? I mean, there's a pretty heavy Saudi role in this. A significant, really, really strong Saudi role in this.
Yeah, let me lead up to that.
Okay.
Let me lay a couple of foundational thoughts, and then I'll get to that.
Okay.
What's happening right now, and by the way, there's different ways this could play out that might not even necessitate the building of a third temple on the Temple Mount, but that still may allow for the Orthodox Jews to begin the services to create a holy place that could be defiled. I'll explain this in just a second. I know that sounds confusing, but just bear with me for a minute. So, third temple in Jerusalem. The move towards that has been happening. It's been part of the peace plan negotiations, though you're not going to hear Donald Trump, not yet. When the time's right, I think he will. But you're not going to hear him come out tomorrow morning and say, what I want to do is see a third temple built in Jerusalem, because that's just a declaration of war. But the idea was it would never happen with Jordanian control and now the Jordanians have the Palestinians, because, the whole peace plan is all about the Palestinians making claim to certain parts of Israel, including Jerusalem and whatever, and they're not going to accept any kind of a peace deal unless they get what they want. So you had to wrestle from the Jordanians control over the Temple Mount in order to give the Orthodox Jews what they want, and really to play Donald Trump. Behind the scenes, Donald Trump is being told, well, it's not all just behind the scenes. The rabbis are being spoken about this across Israel, including members of the Sanhedrin and whatever. But he's being told behind the scenes that God put him in this position and that his role is messianic. Not that he is the Messiah, but that he was put into this position to give rise to the Jewish Messianic era, which is also going to include the building of a third temple. Donald Trump's been told this. He's not an idiot. He sees the coins with him and Cyrus and the third temple on it. He's totally aware of what's happening. That is the reason why he handed over to his son-in-law, Jared. And by the way, Steve, I had never thought of that until you brought it up, the significance of his name as it's connected to the book of Enoch, the days of Jared. But that's why he handed it over to his Orthodox Jewish son-in-law to handle these negotiations, because Jared is working with the sensitivities of the Orthodox Jews behind the scenes, but then also the political realities of how do you wrestle from the Jordanians control, the control over these sites that are sensitive. But if you understand this phrase, to speak in sato, it means to say things that mean something beneath the surface to those that are in the know and understand. And that's exactly why Netanyahu said when Donald Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, he was making history. He was speaking prophetically. These are prophetic times, Netanyahu said, and the Temple Mount is in our hands. These are all really strong phrases that go directly to the intended audience to signal to them, we're on your side. When the time is right, we're going to speak in full-throated voice in support of control over the Temple Mount, the coming of a third temple, and so on. Now, connected to all of that stuff, I believe that when the time is right, Donald Trump is, as the rabbis in Israel hold, he's going to play a key role, as he has been so far, by speaking in favor of the third temple construction. And when that happens, I'm telling you, it's going to ignite the single most important and prophetic event in our lifetime. Now, unfortunately, as Steve has pointed out, for those who at first are finding all this great joy in the temple's construction, that exuberance is going to be short-lived, and it's going to cave to terror. Now, how many people around the world that are listening to this program understand that these are already facts? Number one, that the architectural plans for the third temple have already been designed. Number two, that the Sanhedrin, the in essence tribunal that styles itself after the Second Temple era Jewish court, recently instructed Jerusalem mayoral candidates to include in their plans the building of the third temple. How many know that at the close of 2018, the Sanhedrin also invited 70 nations to dedicate the altar for the third temple? And we can talk later about the significance of the number 70 and the number 72, but it's again tied to what Steve was saying about Jared and the book of Enoch. Evangelical Christians and Jews gathering in Jerusalem at the close of 2018 for this huge interfaith conference. This was only a couple of months ago. And what was the point of it? Go and Google this and read. It was aimed at joining efforts to build the third temple and for the inaugurating of the Messianic era. I mean, seriously, Christian friend, how could you be more confused? The Messiah has already came. That era was already launched 2,000 plus years ago, right? Anyway, Freemasons, I don't spend a lot of time on this in the book, but Freemasons in the U.S. and Israel have been planning for decades to build a third temple. I talk a little bit about that. We all know that Jews are demanding access now to the Temple Mount. They're having visions of the third temple. Steve said a moment ago, September a newborn red heifer certified by a board of rabbis as fulfilling all the biblical requirements for temple service. And the red heifer is important because this would be used in the purification of the priest for service in the third temple. Anyway, all of this stuff, but Saudi Arabia, to get back to your question, Saudi Arabia, Jewish religious leaders, and Donald Trump have been, with Jared, have been negotiating behind the scenes to transfer control of Israel's holy sites, including the Temple Mount, to the Saudis as part of this peace covenant that will result in, among other things, the building of a third temple. And by the way, there's even some Muslims, a couple of Muslim scholars, that have written in favor of the building of the third Jewish temple. So that's kind of rare. Anyway, so those are some of the revelations that I cover in the book. And I go into the history of the temple movement, what's been happening in Israel, the building of the devices and whatever that's going to be used. But I want to tell you, I'm not sure exactly what I can tell you, but I spent yesterday, hang on. Sorry, I spent yesterday, Monday of this week, in a behind doors meeting that included Jim Barfield, the guy that's been leading up the Copper Scroll project, but 4 other people in that meeting, where we had to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And for people that don't know Jim Barfield, he's a former criminal investigator out of Oklahoma that some in Israel, both in the government, in the Knesset, but also in the Antiquities Department, believe has deciphered the enigmatic 2,000-year-old scroll known as the Copper Scroll, the Dead Sea Copper Scroll, which, if Jim is right, is in essence a treasure map pointing to the hiding place of the lost temple artifacts, as well as the location of the Ark of the Covenant and the Tabernacle of Moses, the table of shewbread, and the altar of incense, and so on. Now, the political restrictions of that region have made excavating the places that Jim's point to difficult, to say the least. But this is connected to these behind-the-scenes negotiations. And all of that could change very soon. And there is almost a sense of desperation that digs in the appropriate places need to happen while Donald Trump is in office, while Israel has favor, like it does right now with the U.S. government, and also potentially changes to who controls these sacred locations. Because if Donald Trump loses in 2020 and then a Democrat or whatever, an Obama-like figure, gains control, then it's very likely that a different kind of peace covenant is going to come down the line, in which control also over Qumran and some of these other sacred locations would be handed over to the Palestinians, and then either the digs would never happen, or if they did, and if anything was uncovered, they would claim possession of them. So if you think of the orthodoxy of what the Temple Mount advocates want to see happen with a third temple and the reinstitution of the sacrifices of animals and all of that, if you think of what they're hoping to be able to see, and you think of the people that are in Donald Trump's ear behind the scenes, including the Orthodox Jewish faith of his son-in-law Jared, the people that are influencing him, many of whom support the idea of the building of a third temple and the launching of the Messianic era, right now is the time before 2020 to make some decisions through the Antiquities departments and so on. And I would love to be able to tell you, and I can't, what those discussions included yesterday. But just know that it represents dozens of people that are part of both this government, I'm talking about at the congressional level, and dozens of people that are involved in the Jewish government that are looking at this question right now. I know that sounds almost too much to believe, but it's absolutely a fact. Now, for people that don't know, the Copper Scroll This was discovered in the 1950s. It's unlike the other Dead Sea Scrolls, all the other Dead Sea Scrolls written on papyrus and so on. The Copper Scroll was inscribed by 4 different writers, they believe, onto a long sheet of copper. I can't remember how long it was, 12 feet or 14 feet or whatever, and when they found it, it was broken in half. But the other difference between the Copper Scroll and the other Dead Sea Scrolls is the Dead Sea Scrolls, as we understand them, they're the ones that contain all the biblical works, including the Book of Enoch, while the Copper Scroll is a list of like 64 or 5 locations where treasure appears to be hidden, including large amounts of gold and silver, probably from King Solomon's treasures or the temple treasury, as well as maybe money that had been accumulated from the Bar revolt against the Romans after the destruction of the Second Temple. But in any case, Barfield set out years ago to discover the truth of the Copper Scroll. And this actually happened after he met Vendell Jones. Remember him, Steve?
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I think I interviewed him years ago.
Yeah, so you had Vendell Jones, who was just this Texas preacher that turned amateur archaeologist, but he spent like 30 years of his life studying the Copper Scroll, and him and Barfield met each other, became friends. Vendell died. Barfield went on. Barfield's an award-winning investigator. He was an arson investigator, so all of his techniques, he won the Oklahoma Arson Investigator of the Year. He also won a National Investigator of the Year award. So all the stuff that he was trained to understand how to do, so getting fingerprints and matching up points on fingerprints, that kind of thing. And then he was also a combat helicopter pilot in the U.S. Army, so he had to learn all this stuff about triangulation and all that. So you can kind of see how his brain works with some of the techniques around fingerprint identification, that kind of thing, how he's looking at these different images and matching them up to the Copper Scroll text, but then also triangulation and that kind of thing. Anyway, my acquaintance, Rabbi Adam Berkowitz at Breaking Israel News, he wrote recently about how Barfield had met with the Israeli Antiquities Authority, the director over there, Shuka or something like that, Dorfman, who was really unreceptive to what Barfield had to say at first, but then as Barfield went through all of his slides and he's showing everything, he's showing the Hebrew language and what it's saying about these different things, he became really enthusiastic, so he sets up this meeting with archaeologist Yuval Peleg, who's, of course, legendary in Israel. I think he died a year or two ago. And Peleg was also skeptical, but then became a complete believer. And they're the ones that first, and this was a mystery too, but they gave dig permits to Jim Barfield. And you can go on Google and you can watch videos about this, and you can see Jim Barfield and Peleg and all these guys in Qumran. And they're getting ready to do all these digs. And at the base of a mountain where Barfield believes is the cave where Jeremiah hid the Ark of the Covenant and other stuff. And it does very much look like a cave has been buried there with a bunch of loose rock and then some kind of superficial structure put in front of it. They got permits to dig there, and they needed to dig down 9 feet. Well, they were only at 1 foot when all of a sudden, they're like literally just 1 hour into the dig, and Peleg gets this mysterious phone call, and without any explanation, all the digs, everything is shut down. And I asked Jim about that, and he said he didn't know for a year, but it turned out that it was some very powerful, an archaeological group in the United States of America that got on the phone that also had connections inside the Israeli government, whatever, and they got that shut down. And anybody that knows anything about archaeologists and that whole field knows there's a lot of jealousy. There's a lot of competition to be the first person to discover X, Y, Z. So anyway, it got shut down. Now, Barfield's findings, though, about this burial cave, part of it, why it was interesting to me, is it conforms to the description, Steve, in the book of 2 Maccabees, where the prophet Jeremiah in Maccabees 2, with the assistance of several people, he hides the holy objects of the temple to protect them from the Babylonians. He seals the cave carefully and records the locations on a copper tablet. That's what it says in the book of 2 Maccabees. And don't forget, that's also where our late friend David Flynn said that the Ark of the Covenant and other treasures were hidden in that area near Mount Nebo in Qumran. In 2 Maccabees, I'm looking at it right now, it says Jeremiah came and found a cave dwelling, and he brought there the tent. Now, that's important. That's the tabernacle of Moses, the portable temple. The tent and the ark and the altar of incense. Then he sealed up the entrance. And I've looked at all of the evidence, including some stuff that we were shown yesterday that's never been online or anywhere else before, that there is reason to believe that Barfield, who's certainly, I mean, he's not a scholar, he's not really an archaeologist, he's none of those things, but one way or another, he may have actually deciphered this. Now, a formal request to scan the area was turned down, but it happened anyway, using a metal detector. And I'm not sure what I can say about this or not say about this, but a member of the Knesset helped Barfield, and they went there anyway, and basically the guards turned their back. And they took this very powerful, one of the most powerful metal detectors in the world, can scan down to 50 feet deep, and what's more important is it discerns the difference between metals. And I saw all of the newest slides yesterday, and it appears that literally the Fort Knox of Israel is in this area, as all these readings are talking about gold and silver. And I don't mean small amounts. We're talking about train loads. Well, okay, maybe not train loads, but certainly dump truck loads of this material and some other very, very unusual stuff. So now I'm bringing all this up about the Copper Scroll because, as I point out in my new Third Temple book, the discovery of the Ark of the Covenant or other temple treasures will demand overnight the construction of the Third Temple. Why? Well, because none of the Abrahamic faiths, not Orthodox Judaism, not Muslims, not Christianity, would tolerate the idea of the Ark of the Covenant or any of those structures being placed in a museum somewhere for gawkers. The Bible was very, strict about this in the Old Testament, about how, and for those that haven't, like the Muslims and the Orthodox Jews that have not accepted Jesus Christ as Messiah, they would certainly believe that this is going to have to be handled in a very particular way. And by the way, Jeremiah also buried there the ephod of the high priest. So the vest that the high priest would wear with the and thummim and the jewels would also be there. And what would have to happen, this is, by the way, how do I know all this? Because this is actually what's being talked about. Behind the scenes, this is the discussion that is part of what is going on right now. That if what they suspect to be true is there, and likely before the end of this year, before the next presidential election, when this territory could be turned over to the Palestinians, this dig needs to be made. If it happens, they have to sanction a high priest, and he's going to have to put on the ephod, and there's going to have to be, they've got to identify members of the Aaronic priesthood, the Levites, or they're going to have a special priest that can say that they're part of the order of Melchizedek, which would have been outside of the Levites. But anyway, it sounds crazy, right? But this is literally what these meetings are about. They're going to have to sanction a priesthood. They've got to go in and remove these things in exactly the right way. But then what do they got to do? Well, according to Maccabees and some other ancient texts, Jeremiah also hid in that cave the tabernacle of Moses. Now, that's the portable temple. That's why he said there's also another way that this could be done that wouldn't require building a third temple on the Temple Mount, although we could talk about the different ways that could happen. But if the tabernacle of Moses was recovered, then the Ark of the Covenant and everything else could be placed inside the portable tent. And actually, if it was recovered at Qumran, they could actually set the tabernacle of Moses up in Qumran if they wanted to. And that could be the location from which the Jewish rituals could once again commence. But they might also set it up somewhere just outside. What's called a prophetic priest could be sanctioned to say that they could set it up right next to the Temple Mount in Israel. Anyway, a lot of stuff like that. By the way, people can get the authorized new book by Shelley Neese, who's worked with Jim Barfield for 20 years. And her brand new book just came out called The Copper Scroll Project. It deals with some of this. It doesn't deal with what I was telling you just now, but it deals with all of this. They can get it free with my new Third Temple book. They can also get Carl Gallup's new book on the Rabbi Kaduri, the rabbi that found Messiah free, a bunch of other free stuff. But like I always do when I'm on Hagmann, if a person buys the Third Temple book, it's called the Third Temple Collection, I think. If they go to our website, click on that and buy that. I'm also going to tell the warehouse to add at no cost the new Belly of the Beast documentary film, which has been selling like crazy.
That's a great documentary.
Because it is actually connected to the Third Temple, because the Washington Freemasons have an interest in the building of the Third Temple. Why? It's in anticipation of the arrival of Antichrist, who they would think of as their Osirian or Apollonian king of the coming Novus Ordo Seclorum. Anyway, if anyone's interested, I'm just saying that if you go to skywatchtv.com, click on the ad at the top of the page, or go to skywatchtvstore.com and check out the new arrivals. You'll see the ad there for the Third Temple Collection. And at checkout, in the comments section, type in, "I heard you on Hagmann," and I'm going to instruct the warehouse to also include at no cost the Belly of the Beast new documentary film.
And that's well worth it. We got about a minute 30 before the top of the hour break. Just for the geographically challenged, by the way, Qumran, you'd made numerous references to that. That, of course, you're referring to the cave area of the caves near the Dead Sea, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, right? I mean, that's Qumran. Yeah.
So if you look at a map, you'll see Mount Nebo kind of up at the top of the point of the Dead Sea. And then looking at a map, to the left of that, you will see the area of Qumran, where the caves are. And Qumran, we only got a minute, so I won't go into all that, but yeah.
All right. Folks, Steve Quayle and Tom Horn, and the great thing about this is you're hearing first here on the Hagmann Report, the rabbis, Donald Trump, and the top secret plan to build the Third Temple. Let me tell you, this reads like an investigative report. I mean, it's the documentation's all there. And I truly believe that if you go back in history, and of course, how Tom and Chris had predicted Pope Benedict the resignation a year in advance, even identifying the month and year he would retire. In the Petrus Romanus book, this even tops that. So, folks, go to the link there to Skywatch TV Store and make sure you type in, I heard this on Hagmann, I heard you on Hagmann. Just make sure you get that in there, because the DVD is great. Eric the Tech talks about it every single day, just about. So, folks, we're going to be right back. You're listening to the Hagmann Report, HagmannReport.com, HagmannReportLive.com. Stay with us. Again, with us, Steve Quayle and Tom Horn. The subject, the rabbis, Donald Trump, and the top secret plan to build the Third Temple. I know I dominated that part of the program. Steve, I'm going to kick it to you. Take it.
Well, one of the things I think is really critical, and Tom, you kind of built the case for what we know, that there is a group of very powerful, very wealthy, and I would even say this, preternatural or people that are not or were once humans that control all the antiquities coming out of the Middle East. Now, what's interesting about the Copper Scroll, when I've talked to different people who have found them in areas where the giants were known to have existed, there's all kinds of evidence that they did write on copper. Also, what's puzzling to me is, if you remember the Syriac, the Armenian New Testament written around the 5th, 6th century, the point is they talk about Adam and Eve and the conflict of Satan. And in that, they talk about a place called the Cave of Treasures, where all the treasures of the patriarchs were buried, along with the bones of Adam and Eve, etc. I want to propose something, that if we are talking about the control of the antiquities, and I don't know how God hid, it doesn't say in the Word of God hid Moses' body, but it doesn't say he hid Adam and Eve's. I can't even imagine what the power brokers would like to claim. And are you familiar with Adam and Eve and Satan? It's basically pseudepigraphal. But what's important is we're talking about caves of treasures, and therein lies the link. And I just put up a link on my website, ladies and gentlemen, because 12 times in the book of Revelation it talks about the dragon manifesting in the end times. And there's a story that came out of Iceland with an amazing photograph. I don't know if you've seen it yet, Tom, but it's a green dragon in the sky that leaves nothing to the imagination. It's definitely a dragon. So if the book of Revelation is talking in 12 different areas about the time of the dragon, I think it's really important that people understand that we've got all of these hidden things that have been hidden until the time that, in essence, all of the treasures that Tom and you're talking about, you're delineating, there had to be the context of time, and this is it. That's why I believe, Doug, this is a watershed event, and the content now that everything that has come together, and I'm a believer that they will erect the tabernacle of Moses because, quite candidly, it has more history and more, it can be facilitated, I guess, probably I forget what the Old Testament said, but I think it can be put up within a day if they're doing it the right way according to the instructions that God gave them. So, Tom, are you familiar with the story of Adam and Eve in the Cave of Treasures? This has everything to do with the Copper Scrolls.
Only the Cave of Treasures part of it, and that there are numerous pseudepigraphal works that seem to echo what is in 2nd Maccabees, and also the findings that I was learning about yesterday involving Qumran. In fact, I heard there was some points made yesterday that I have never heard in scholarship anywhere before, but a connection between Qumran and actually the priestly order of Melchizedek, and evidence that when Jesus went away and went into training and then came back, and his parents are looking for him saying, "Where have you been and what are you doing? Didn't you know I should be about my Father's business?" There's some evidence to suggest that he was actually in Qumran, because remember, it says that he was made a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. So that even though his bloodline is majestically preserved in the gospel to show that he's got this Davidic lineage, it's quite possible that he wouldn't have needed it anyway, because he was the priesthood not after the Levite. And so literally at the end of, and this was a long meeting, by the way, this was about 5 hours. It included film, it included 4 other authorities. I had to sign a non-disclosure. Well, everybody in the meeting did. And Jim Barfield happened to be one of the people there.
Well, here's the deal, too. The technology now of GPR, ground-penetrating radar, they have aerial drones that, I I'll just say this, that we were fortunate enough to find the newest technology that we're using in Peru, That's all I dare say. But the differentiation, the delineation, the ability to discern between copper, gold, and silver, that's been tweaked to such a point that it's the feat has been accomplished.
Right.
But the fact is that the controlled release of this, watch the headlines, ladies and gentlemen, because each event, it is my contention, I think, Tom, you'd agree with this, that the timing of the release is synced specifically with the, and I'll use this as my word, mayhem that the enemy, the devil, plans. And again, I want everyone to go and look at, NASA releases a picture of the mysterious dragon aurora reading its head, and they said, here's what they wrote. They said, have you ever seen a dragon in the sky? Although real flying dragons don't exist, a huge dragon-shaped aurora developed in the sky over Iceland earlier this month. And so they even go on to say that the normal reasons why auroras, ionize is because of particles. But they said there wasn't a lot of particles. So they're saying, this is weird. Number one, the real reason that it shouldn't happen. So why am I saying this? Because I believe what we're talking about tonight, I don't know when the dragon is going to be cast out in Revelation 12:9, but I'm excited. I mean, this is spinning my tires, Brother Horn and Doug. I'm about ready to launch. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him 12 times in the book of Revelation, and that's the only place the word dragon appears, and then 22 times it appears in the Old Testament. So it's interesting that 12 times, and that Revelation chapter 12 and 13, 16 and 20 makes such a big deal about it. So, Tom, I would say this. Based on the meeting you had, based on the book you've written, based on the warning to the Christians, I pray that the Christians will start to say, you know what? It's within the heart of a king to search out a matter, and that they need to understand that we are at the precipice of, monumental events, and the second coming of the Lord Jesus Christ after a whole lot of terrible stuff's happening. But what we're talking about is the greatest, in my opinion, the greatest prophetic unearthings in all of the New Testament and all of the end times. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Well, that's why I said that I've not had this feeling since when Chris Putnam and I wrote Petrus Romana. And because I spoke at your conference. By the way, we should talk about your conference too. But I spoke at your conference 2 years ago in Branson, and I laid out for everybody the trail of how that all got started, all of the mystical kind of preternatural, supernatural, whatever you want to call them, things that were happening, all these dominoes that were falling that led to me and Chris Putnam. Because you know me, I'm a really careful guy. I don't consider myself a prophet, and I don't go on programs and predict that things are going to happen. That's probably the first time in my life you've ever heard me go on programs. I did it on Sid Roth, Jim Baker, your program, Hagman, and I said, we are predicting that Pope Benedict XVI is going to step down in April of 2012. And when 2012 came and went, it didn't appear that he was going to retire. Chris and I thought we missed the date. We still thought our work was important. But then February 28, 2013, the Vatican announces Benedict XVI has resigned. And oh, by the way, we're going to give an interview with the New York Times today, the El Observatorio Romano and the New York Times, in which they revealed that Pope Benedict had actually secretly resigned in front of the Roman Curia, the Roman Vatican government, in April of 2012. And my phone just literally rang off the hook. Everybody everywhere, including CNN, tried 3 times to get me to come on their show, and I told them I don't do fake news. But the point was, I have not, until then, I have not had this kind of, it's a gut feeling, but it's something more than that. It's a God thing.
It's a stirring, Tom. It's stirring in your inner man. I would say that's a good word. Stir up. They were told to stir up the gift of the Holy Ghost. I'm preaching to an old-time preacher here.
Well, and Stephen, I also think that, you were saying a moment ago, who are the international players that own the control of the release of some of this information? Some of them call themselves Christians, others are occultists, others are mystics, whatever, Kabbalists. But they're very powerful people that are operating behind the scenes, and they're connected at the highest level of politics, too. So we're talking about international oil trade, things like that mean gazillions of dollars to the people that are in the right place to take advantage of it. And they see everybody else, all of us common people, as just pawns in the game. But so you were asking about that. But the Bible, so it's interesting because the Scripture, when it's talking about the end times, it does talk about the political machinations of the Antichrist. It also talks about the spiritual machinations of the false prophet. But then accompanying all of that, it talks about signs in the heavens. And you're talking about this aurora or whatever with the dragon. There was an article a couple of days ago, and it was on Daily Mail. What have scientists spotted in Earth's upper atmosphere with unexplained explosions of light and cloud-free skies? Did you see that?
Yes, I did. I posted it.
And it's something very odd. They don't know what it is. They've actually recorded the images with a telescope, and they don't know what it is. They say it's a new physical phenomena that we don't even know what the physical nature of it is. But if you read the article over on Daily Mail, it very much sounds like, Steve, like Stargate activity or angelic activity, the gates of heaven, something very weird going on in the heavens. But the Bible talked about when all this stuff is happening, leading up to the abomination of desolation that Paul and Jesus and Daniel predicted for the third temple, all this other stuff would be happening too. So if people want to believe it's a coincidence, of course that's their right. But for somebody like myself, for us, watchmen, people who are watching the end times, that, our dear old brother David Flynn, he loved to quote, who was the physicist, that talked about how in the end times that this body of enlightened individuals would rise up.
Oh, Sir Isaac Newton. That God would raise up men that are given an understanding amongst much clamor and uproar. Boy, does that sound like email.
Now, let me tell you, I can't tell you, as you know, I have a few connections in Washington. Most people know Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis from the Pentagon because I'm his publisher, so they know that we have that connection. But this was not him. He's aware of all this, but this was not him. And so when you say, who are the power brokers that are going to control the flow of disclosure? Well, definitely, Donald Trump is part of it by virtue of his office. His Jewish son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is one of the negotiators, and he's been working behind the scenes on aspects of more than just the Middle East peace deal, but that too. Then there are some influential rabbis in Israel, some of whom have already recognized Trump publicly as a source of inspiration for the Third Temple. There's also right-wing Knesset members. There's an organization called Yareh, R-E-Y-A-E-H, and they're Temple Mount loyalists, and they work with some of the other known advocacy groups over there. There's also some Muslim scholars. They're secular scholars. They're Muslim in name only, really. But they believe that the Third Temple can now become a collaborative effort between them and the Jews. Now, by the way, if you Google this, you'll read there's names out there that are publicly known. Zaya Shah, who is the chief editor of the Muslim Times, is working with Yehuda Glick, who's a prominent Jewish advocate for the Third Temple and a member of the Knesset, that's been nurturing some of the interfaith dialogue between Muslims and Christians and Jews connected to the Trump administration. And then there's Brazil's recent election of what's his name, Bolsonaro. He unabashedly embraces Christianity and supports Israel, but what a lot of people are not paying attention to is he believes his election, and those around him, marks the beginning of the Third Temple. You can Google this and read it. They talk openly. They believe that the impetus for the Third Temple is going to be initiated in South America in a process that's already started. And these evangelicals over there have tremendous power all across Brazil and Latin America. And they're not hiding the fact that they believe that Jews should rebuild their biblical temple in Jerusalem, and they want to be part of it. They want to be key to the steps in the process, the series of events that lead to the building of the Third Temple, because they think it's going to lead to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Well, I would say I believe part of that is true too, but please understand, before the second coming, there's going to be a very terrible time. So, be careful what you're throwing your money behind. Of course, we already mentioned the Jewish Sanhedrin. So there's a list, but in the book that I just put into print, we go into this issue a lot deeper than what people might be able to Google or find on their own, into areas that are more intriguing, including actual espionage, subterfuge, by the very entities that can actually make a rebuilt temple happen. Although, from what I learned yesterday, it's probably more likely it's going to be the Tabernacle of Moses, at least in the beginning, and then leading toward the push for a third temple. But the main power brokers here, we're talking about the United States, with back-channel negotiations between the Trump administration and Saudi Arabia that could result in Riyadh replacing the Jordanian Waqf's management of the Temple Mount. And then don't forget this, the Vatican. The Islamic Waqf is the religious trust that controls and manages the current Islamic edifices on and around the Temple Mount, including the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. And the King of Jordan supplies the funding that's needed for operations by the Waqf. And so in one form or another, they govern access to the site because of the Muslim, the reconquest of the Kingdom of Jerusalem in the 1100s. And so you guys are all familiar with all that, all the tensions, the Jews, the Muslims, blah, blah, blah. But look what Pope Francis just did with, what they're calling a historic agreement that he reached with the Muslims. So the Vatican is also one of the most powerful players operating behind the scenes, and I know the least about what they're doing. I know, in the new book, the work that I did had mostly to do with what was being fed to me from Washington, D.C., between the Trump administration, his Jewish son-in-law, and Saudi Arabia. But there is also this other thing that is going on with the Vatican, and we know, Chris and I delved into this in two of our books, where we talked about the Vatican's interest in Jerusalem as well as control over the Temple Mount.
Well, I think, too, Tom, it's got to be brought up, the whole alien connection thing, because, when Jesus said, signs of the sun, moon, and stars and all of the aerial phenomenon taking place, after Branson this year, Branson 2, on Transhumanism Hybrid Age, I basically have been telling everybody leading up to Branson 3, which is called Answering the Alien Question. We've got so much happening now, and finally some good quality stuff coming out, but the work that you did on Exo Vaticana and the absolute, if you will, the whole Guy Cosmologno, all that work. I mean, we're at the, how do I say this? We are at not the crossroads. We're at the railroad round table with all the different tracks now all coming into the center, forming a nexus. And I think it's important that people understand this, because can you imagine seriously, they've already had, I think Barry Gary Kamish was talking about the flying saucers in Jerusalem and even the ones landing. Can you imagine on the appearance of the AC, the Antichrist, and all the things leading up, the aerial phenomenon that is going to take place? I think it's going to be so mind-blowing that most people won't be able to even embrace it. That's what the purpose of Branson is this year, and we're about, I think, close to being half sold out.
Wow.
And please, ladies and gentlemen, in September, that's a long ways away, and people have asked us, and the reason we opened it up so early was so people get the best travel arrangements possible. But I'm telling you, this year we've got some really important UFO researchers, Michael Schratt, on all the advanced flying machines. And by the way, they were present in 4000 BC India, known as Vimanas, and all the stuff that was even pre-Adamic. So we have a convergence. So when the book of Revelation says, "Woe unto you, inhabitants of the earth," for the devil having great wrath knows his time is short. I don't think people see. Here's what I'm really frustrated with. Maybe you can help me. And it's not take 2 aspirin, go to bed, and wake up in the morning. But do you believe, Tom, that are you seeing more Christians now, as you've written what you've written, you've published what you've published for other authors, starting to get the feel, just like the stirring that's going on? The only word I know how to do it is God is troubling the waters, so to speak, not to make anybody have personal, trouble, but there is a convergence coming of everything, and it's indicating that we are in a fast pace. So I'll let you answer the question, are you seeing more people getting the true spiritual nature of deception? Because in my opinion, modern evangelical Christianity, and you know it better than I do, just because you publish, a lot of people's stuff, they see the temple as a good thing. They don't understand and don't believe the tribulation is going to be here. The majority of evangelicals think they're out of here. That's not the discussion. But are you seeing any kind of, I would say, accelerating awareness?
Here's how I would phrase this. To me, deception, confusion, those are the things that are escalating exponentially. You saw the Pew Research studies recently. Pew Research, very respected, and they polled a very large number of evangelical Christians. They only asked them 4 questions, and the 4 questions should have just been, every evangelical should have said, no, that's just stupid. Do you believe in reincarnation? Things like that. And 61% of evangelicals believed in these New Age points of view. If they had asked more subtler kind of New Age ideas, it probably would have accelerated to 75 or 80% of evangelicals today across the United States of America holding really occult views, New Age views. They have nothing to do with, they're antithetical to Orthodox Christianity, New Testament theology, systematic theology. And so they are very, Steve, evangelical Christians today are very caught up in this idea of the ancient astronaut theories and some of this other stuff that you're going to be addressing at your conference in Branson. Now, I don't want to get lost in this, but our conference in Branson, the Skywatch TV conference that happens at a different time of the year and it's much smaller than yours, is sold out. There was a little bit of confusion because some people thought that your conference was sold out, which it isn't. It's going to sell out, but it isn't yet. And people need to hurry and get their registration if they're going to be part of your conference, because what you're dealing with couldn't be timelier. In fact, I'm really happy that you picked the subject matter of dealing with, what is the real answer to the alien question or the ancient astronaut question? Because I had a guy email me today, this morning, and he was at a conference, and Guy Consolmagno, the head of the Vatican Observatory Research Group today, was there. And as you know, a few years back when Chris Putnam and I went up to Mount Graham, I contacted Brother Consolmagno, and he agreed to do 5 different interviews with me, and we interviewed him. And I have the email, by the way, exchanges for those interviews to this day. They're still in my inbox. But when we wrote our book, because some of the stuff that he said was so out there, that I decided that I was not going to quote anything from the emails. I was only going to quote his own book, Intelligent Life in the Universe, which by itself is extraordinary. So anyway, somebody that had read the book that Chris Putnam and I wrote, Exo Vaticana, was at a college, and it was a lecture by Brother Guy Consolmagno here just last week. And the guy put him on the spot. So there was a Q&A, I guess, at the end of his presentation, and he said, hey, I read a book by a guy named Tom Horn and Chris Putnam on Exo Vaticana, and they quote you in their book. Is it true that you said XYZ? And he said, guy stood up, got all nervous. He said, no, that Tom Horn, he's a liar. He just wants to sell his book for $400. I never said any of those things. So he emailed me to ask me, what the skinny on it was. I said, well, unfortunately for Guy, we didn't quote one part of any private exchange we had with him. The only things we quoted are in his book, and we provide the PDF of his book free to anybody that asked for it. So he's got nowhere to go. He said these things. He believes them. And the point is, Vatican authorities are contending that extraterrestrials actually express the glory of God better than we humans do, even leading mankind to venerate them as gods. It's a theme now that's being written into their some of their doctrine that has to go through a process. Well, it's papers that have to go through a process of being accepted as doctrine. And we've done whole shows on that. We don't need to do more of it. But the point is, we have entered into a moment of time, Steve, in my opinion, where deception is astonishing. When you and me were young preachers in the Assemblies of God, you wouldn't have found 1% of evangelical Christians that would have believed in things like reincarnation and your astral soul projection and all. It's completely unhinged now. It's completely out of the box.
Well, I think, too, what's going to be different about this Branson, and it's really important, we've got Michael Schratt coming, and he's a military aerospace historian. There's so much argument over, for instance, top secret Q magic clearance, which really exists, and there's a lot of people that get nervous, but there's an ultra-black world in this, and Michael Schratt is basically going to be talking about advanced technology and reverse engineer. We have a secret guest who I'll be announcing next week, and you know who it is, Tom, whose family was uniquely tied to the aerospace industry, and he was involved watching his uncle and his father and others, in the reverse engineering program, and literally was followed while he was flying for 1 hour with a UFO, and he's one of the most credentialed Bible researchers in the world. How's that for bait? But
I'm glad you got him to agree.
Yep. And I think that what's important is that people have got to understand, after Branson transmitted every day, I basically made a statement that the word normal would never be used again. It wouldn't be seen. There will be nothing normal from September 15th on. Wow. Bam. Look what's happening. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to register, and I'd suggest if you want to go there, you do register, gen6.com, GENSIX.com. Click on more info, and it'll take you where you can register. And one of the things that is really critical, Tom, is that I guess I hate the word because it almost sounds almost New Agey, but the convergence of from heaven, from hell. When you and I first started talking about the gates of hell opening, and it was obviously you that brought that up on a show we did with Doug Hagman, Doug, 15 years ago?
I was thinking about that earlier.
At least 15 years ago.
It was quite a while ago. Yeah, probably. Yeah.
But anyway, the point that I'm trying to make on that is now the gates of hell are opening. It doesn't matter if you're just seeing dragon apparitions. You're seeing the 21 UFOs and then the NASA killing the feed, the live International Space Station feed. You've got all these events happening. Now they're worldwide. So there are countries that aren't so in love with the United States that are actually having all of this stuff becoming more and more prevalent and available. And by the way, I'm on record as stating this, and I still stand by it. The great quakes that are coming, and coupled with the great volcanoes, are going to unleash some of the most hidden and some of the most mysterious civilizations the world's ever known, whether it's Antarctica's ice sheet breaking up, solar flare that melts the ice, raises the ocean. But things are happening, and they can't keep it under wraps, so they have to take control of the narrative again. And this is something else I wish Christians would understand. The New World Order demands a World War III. You cannot have a man of peace coming on the scene without World War III. And that's why, against all common sense, against even willing, hey, it's not a bad thing for Russia to talk to, the Trump administration, try and keep treaties in place and everything, but there's an unseen hand there. And in order, and I believe it's the devil, I believe the devil literally rules through his fallen angel, personifications in human form, and I believe that that's the only way you can even account for the supernatural evil that is present in the world, and it's all building to this explosion point. Go ahead.
Well, so, people, as you're talking about this, it makes me think about this theory that you postulated. And, man, see, this is back when you and I were doing shortwave radio programs, so this is 25 years ago or something like that. But the idea that aliens were going to play some kind of a role I don't even really like using the term a rapture concept or whatever, but the disappearance of people from the face of the earth. And yet, Antichrist, so we're talking about the third temple, but we're also talking about alien technology. And most people would not immediately recognize that there's a connection between the two. That if all of a sudden you have this Superman-like figure who descends from heaven, he would certainly, put muscle behind the idea of the building of a third temple, but he would also be the Antichrist, and he would also be accepted by all of these New Age-leaning evangelical Christians now as the second coming of their Christ, of their Messiah. A great deception. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. That's the whole point, Tom, I guess, tonight, why it's so important. And, Doug, this is why it's critical, and thank you for letting Tom and I come on. Jesus said, if it were possible, even the elect would be deceived. And the overwhelming fear and trepidation and world situation, they're going to beg for this entity. And I think that's if people leave with nothing more tonight, then, number one, they've got to get your book, because, again, ladies and gentlemen, Tom and Chris nailed it on the Vatican. Tom and Chris nailed it when they went to Mount Graham, and all of Cosmologno's lies don't undo his PDF. And so the point is, the PDF is his own Cosmologno, the head Church of Rome's astronomer. And so the amount of effort that's being made, that has been made. Tom, it's interesting. The UFO phenomenon seems to be peaking or coming to a peak or even a crescendo, consistent or concurrent, not consistent, concurrent with the antiquities coming out of the Judean desert, the caves of Qumran. And I would encourage everybody to look at the, if you will, the nature of all of it happening, because Jesus said there's nothing that's been hidden that isn't going to be revealed. And so the context of all this stuff, only now, Tom, 20 years later than when we first started on shortwave radio, could people have the ability to embrace the content in the context of this time?
Yeah. So, there's a couple of questions that it kind of come to my mind in this discussion. One of them, the arguments that people would make that there's no way that a third temple could be built, because it would be the beginning of World War III if you tried to do something with the Muslim artifacts. So if we get a chance, I'll try to say something about that very quickly. There's several ways in which actually actually that could be sidestepped. But with regard to the connection to your conference that's coming up in Branson and why people should be there, and thinking back over the history, Steve, of all the programs that you and I have done and the role of the Vatican and all this stuff, there's no doubt that there is a demonic element with UFOs and coming of Antichrist, and therefore the building of the third temple. That there is a phenomenology here that is connected to what, for instance, what a lot of people might call the UFO phenomenon. So this strange stuff that's appearing in the heavens, as well as alien abduction phenomenon, and that these entities would be doing this for their own reasons. Now, in theology, there's this term called transmogrification. This is where spirits can take form, and they can move things around like poltergeist activity.
And shapeshifters.
The only way they can do that is if they have some capacity for manipulating energy, manipulating matter. You said something about one of the speakers from the conference a minute ago that made me think of this, and now I can't remember what the trigger was. But the point is, the fact that they can do this, maybe demons produce this phenomenon known as unidentified flying objects, or a dragon appears to have, or this other stuff that was being reported last week, these strange doorways, gateways in the heavens that are opening. They're either mimicking something that God himself does. Jesus said, from henceforth you will see the gates of heaven, the windows of heaven, opening and closing, and the angels ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. So this is, think of it as angelic technology, but it is something that does happen. But it also seems to happen among the demonic realm. They can manipulate energy. And there's a whole list of reasons, by the way, why they might do that, including for the purposes of deceiving New Agey evangelicals, frankly. And I also think that they could be a driving force behind what you're going to be dealing with in Branson, the truth behind the whole disclosure movement, this idea that we are moving towards a moment. You know, last year we did programs, Doug, you might remember this, where we were talking about the WikiLeaks emails.
Yep.
And in those WikiLeaks emails, there were exchanges between the Podestas and this lady who was a representative of the Vatican. And they were talking about that if Hillary Clinton is elected, we are going to move into full disclosure. And there were all these strange emails in there about contiguous alien, an alien presence that is around us all of the time. Now, 2020 is coming. Are we going to push the lever back towards an official disclosure moment? I really do believe that a lot of this is coming and that it is connected to demonology and to great deception. One of the obvious purposes might be to confuse even the field of human origin, to draw Christians and other believers away from the faith, from their faith in God as a creator, the whole transhumanist movement, which you dealt with last year at your conference, Dave. So there are some ageless questions here that I really want people to sign up to be at the Branson Conference. Steve, what's the date for the Branson Conference?
This year it's September 13th through 15th. And it's in Branson, Missouri. It's at the theater there. I
Mansion
forget
Theater.
the name of it.
Mansion Theater.
I'm sorry, what is it, Doug?
Mansion Theater.
Yeah, the Mansion in Branson. Gosh, how can I forget that? I'm so enthralled, and I really am. I'm paying attention to everything Tom's saying. And the point is, ladies and gentlemen, it will sell out. And we're half sold out already, and the purpose of this, we've pulled together, and Tom, seriously, we pulled together the who's who in the world of real researchers, and I think people are going to be blown away because it's going to be beyond. In essence, it's coming at them from all angles. Certainly not just the Christian faith. Obviously, that's how you and I approach it. But there are people that are skilled researchers that obviously, come at it from a whole different way, a whole different perspective. And that if they sign up now, they get a discount coupon. And I think it's important that people recognize that, look, these conferences, and we get a lot of flack, but you know this, we do them first class, and even the production of the DVDs. I've been told that the production of the DVDs, not the production, but the dissemination of the DVDs, they've gone all over the world, and we can tell by the orders for them where they're at. I think they're in 65 nations, and people are absolutely being blown, and their minds are being blown. And, some pastors, and God bless the small pastors, they're getting with it. And again, ladies and gentlemen, if you are a legitimate pastor that knows that the stuff that Tom Horn and I are talking about, just send me an email with a pastor on it, and I want to make sure you guys get the newest book that I've got called Terminated, The End of Man is Here. Because, Tom, they just basically put out on Drudge, the front page of Drudge today, that sex robots, they're worried that they're going to get hacked and they're going to turn into what I term snuff bots or killer sex robots.
Right,
ladies and gentlemen, 10 years ago, people said, quail's doing, mushrooms or something. I wouldn't even know which ones to do. But the point being is that it's now coming to pass. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you can't receive this stuff right now, just seriously, if you are Bible-believing Christians, ask God to literally show you how this is playing out. Because the Bible says that surely Lord God will do nothing except He reveals the secrets to His servants, the prophets. And Tom is not a prophet, I am not a prophet. But the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. And so when Jesus is telling us what's going to happen ahead of time, and now we're seeing it happening ahead of time, and men's hearts failing them for fear for looking after those things coming upon the earth, and then we're seeing dragons in the sky and all this stuff. Forget the riders in the sky, now we're seeing dragons in the sky, and they're green, and green is a sign of the pale horse in Revelation, Chloros. I think that you really ought to take advantage of signing up, and we have a discount on buying the videos ahead of time. And if you buy the video ahead of time, you save $20, the set of videos from the 2019 conference. And I give my book, Aliens and Fallen Angels, The Sexual Corruption of the Human Race. Remember when I first put that out, Tom? Whoa. Some people just wanted to interview me just to find out how aliens are, procreating. I'll be very, very tactful here, but the point is that at the end of the day, advanced species wouldn't need to come and take biological samples from humans in order to interject themselves, as the book of Jude says, into the human genome.
That's mind-blowing.
Yeah, so two things. If people want to be able to get information, even be able to interact with the experts, they need to sign up for the Branson Conference, your Branson Conference in September. You can repeat the date when that is happening. The experts will be there, and I'm going to say some more about that in a moment before we run out of time. The earlier part of this program, we started out talking about the coming Third Temple, and at first it wouldn't seem that the Third Temple is connected in any way with a so-called alien phenomenology, but in fact it is, because when the Antichrist comes, he's very connected to strange signs in the heavens and wonders and all of the prophecies I'll hopefully get a chance to mention here in a moment. So if people want to get the new book, The Rabbis, Donald Trump, and the Top Secret Plan, we have not even scratched the surface on the meaty part of this research, and we probably won't have time to tonight. But get the book, and if you do, we're going to give you the Copper Scroll Project book free, which is very important. Carl Gallup's new book, Rabbi Kaduri, free. Some other free stuff, I forget what all it is. I think it's a set of the best of from the Oklahoma City conference from last year.
Yep.
But anyway, we're giving all that away free, but don't forget, if you go to skywatchtv.com or skywatchtvstore.com and you buy the Third Temple collection, I think that's what they're calling it.
Yes, the coming Third Temple. The Coming Third Temple collection. And by the way, folks, I highly recommend this. This package, you can't beat it with a stick. And the book itself is worth the price, the $30 donation. Go ahead, sir.
$30 donation. So you're going to wind up with all these books and all this other stuff. But when you check out, type in, I heard you on Hagmann, and I'm going to have them actually include it's a brand new movie. It just came out last month. Belly of the Beast. It's probably one of the best things we've ever produced. And I'm going to have them include that to you free because we always do that for Hagmann listeners. Two other things, though. So do that. If you're interested, go to skywatchtv.com or go to skywatchtvstore.com. Click on the ad there. Say, I heard you on Hagmann. You'll get all the free stuff. But, folks, also please remember to do something for the Hagmann. Doug didn't know I was going to say anything like this, but they everything they do to bring truth, and sometimes at significant opposition from the controllers. And I appreciate Doug and Joe Hagmann so much. Everything they do to bring you the truth. If you can do something in terms of a donation towards this program, please remember to do that. And then the other thing is make sure that you sign up. Steve's conferences have sold out. Steve started these conferences 3 years ago in Branson. They've sold out every year. The Mansion Theater is a beautiful venue. It holds 3,000 people, if that tells you the strength of Steve's draw. It will sell out again this year. They have really great security, so you don't got to be worried about that. And they always have the top speakers. And this year, they're really dealing with what I would consider to be the ageless question, Steve. Where did we come from? Because that's what I saw in the most recent Pew Research statistic showing how much evangelical Christians are being drawn into the occult and into the New Age. They're really asking, where did we come from? And behind that question is, did aliens come here? Because if people believe that UFO knots, advanced extraterrestrials, were scurrying about in spaceships 6,000 years ago, and that those creatures visited Earth in ancient days, the ancient astronauts theory, right? And they tinkered with hominid DNA, apes or whatever, and they uplifted them to our current status and created Homo sapiens. If people believe that, and it appears today that a majority of religiously minded people do think there's something to that, then that obliterates portions of Judeo-Christianity, the view concerning biblical creation. In other words, people are led to believe that we're nothing more than an alien zoology program, and that is a significant problem on 1,000 different kind of levels. Secondly, there's eschatological issues, end times issues, a great deception. It says in the New Testament that the appearance of the Antichrist is going to be accompanied, Luke 21:11, going to be accompanied by, quote, fearful sight and great signs from heaven, end quote. You have the book of 2 Thessalonians saying that when the Antichrist is revealed, he's going to be accompanied by lying wonders, 2 Thessalonians 2:9. So what are these lying wonders? There are people who believe that this could be part of a UFO armada, something that could be used to introduce the man of sin, the Antichrist, who's going to claim residence in this third temple. And you have to ask yourself, wouldn't the world react to the sudden arrival of an intergalactic wise man with an armada of ships? Wouldn't they react to that with paralyzing awe and wonder?
Oh, absolutely, especially, the whole, I call that the Prometheus factor, and even, there are rumors out there that the aviary, which is something you and I touched on, a group of very influential and well-known people in the deep black project area, that they have discs, like the famous Dropa discs of the Dogon, that supposedly they have the flying saucers hovering around the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, claiming that he, Jesus, they created. See, this is, ladies and gentlemen, we're pleading with you. This sounds so wild, I know. It's off the playing field, but take it and really ponder it. When great deception, if Jesus said it's going to be so intense in the deception that if he didn't shorten the days for the elect's sake, his followers, the believers in Jesus, as Lord and Savior, that there'd be no flesh left alive. You take transhumanism, you take the aliens, you take all this stuff, and then people say to me, Tom, I'll get emails, well, what are we supposed to do with all this stuff? What can we do about any of it? It's simple. God said he's never going to leave us or forsake us to those who call upon his name, and that he doesn't want people destroyed. If all of the secrets, here's something that people have got to answer the question for themselves. If all of the powerful entities, both earthly and preternatural, meaning evil, whether it's shape-shifting fallen angels, demons, whatever, the point is that they're working overtime, knowing their time is short, then you want to make sure that you have a context to understand this stuff so you're not blown away. And if you look at science fiction, that's what's programmed. Let's go ahead, Tom, close it out. We've got, 4 minutes?
No, we got about 2 minutes left here. So.
Well, 2 minutes. Okay, so you know me, I can't say anything in 2 minutes. So the bottom line is, please do something to support Hagmann Report. We depend so much, and when I say we, I mean all of us that are listening to this program. We depend so much on the dissemination of truth, of facts, of solid investigation. Look, I know Donald Trump might be the most inarticulate human that's ever lived. Okay, you're going to get mad at me for having said that. But he is right when he talks about fake news and all the rest of it. There is an effort to control the spin of information. And there are very few lighthouses right now on whom we can depend to give us the real truth and nothing but the truth, so help them God. And the Hagmann Report is one of the very few right now on whom we can depend. Please, if you can, help keep this newscaster on the air because we depend on them. Make sure you sign up for the Branson Conference, September 13th through the 15th, I think Steve said. September 13th through the 15th, right?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Branson, Missouri.
In Branson, Missouri, because the truth is there's great deception is coming. And it's going to be part of how the demonic world is going to use it to paralyze humanity, to stop all the social structures as we know them. I mean, who's going to be going to the bank and drawing out some money and going to Walmart shopping for presents if all of a sudden you've got a mile-wide UFO hovering over the White House? It's literally going to stop all of the economies of the world. And if those figures say there needs to be a third temple, there's going to be a third temple. So, look, we barely scratched the surface of this discussion tonight. I hope you get the book, The Coming Third Temple, and the free movie and all that. I hope you sign up for the Branson Conference. I hope you support Hagmann because there is no guarantee that tomorrow any one of us, Skywatch TV, Steve Quayle, or the Hagmann Report will be here.
Amen.
We live in perilous times, and things can change very quickly, literally overnight. So please, be a part of the truth movement while you can.